Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. Now, well over a year ago, I did a kit bash on my Space Marines where I took some servo turrets, some armiger legs and made walking turrets. That left me with these armiger hulls spare. Recently, I did a Nurgle kit bash based off these. Now it's time for a Space Marine kit bash. Now, why am I showing you a Storm Talon gunship? Because this is kind of how this kit bash started. I wanted some engines for this kit bash, so I bought a Storm Talon because you get this fantastic sprue, and this is the alternate build. You can make a Stormhawk out of it. Didn't build a Stormhawk because I wanted these engines that you see in here. Now it's about fitting these engines to this armiger hull. So chopping off what are the mounts for the armour panels that go over the shoulders of the armiger, slicing that down to really start to try to fit the engines. Now you'll notice when I'm doing this kit bash, there wasn't really a predetermined method of what I was doing. I just wanted to get these engines mounted on the side. So I built up the weapon mounts that go on the arms of the armiger and thought, right, how do we fit the engine to this? Played around for a while, worked out how I'm going to link it on, and actually decided the best way to do it was use the exact weapon mounts, but slice off one of the kind of arms that goes on that mount and slot it into the engine cowling kind of thing as you see here. So, process kind of decided, getting these glued onto the model. Now, thankfully, this was a fairly quick kit bash and I was working through these initial stages fairly quickly, because if you see here, they're glued on in a completely different angle to how they end up being glued. Now, that's because I was going to use the torso, I suppose what you would think as the traditional way round, with these vents you can see that end up at the bottom of my kit bash at the top. Now, got to this part, and this is the weapon mount, again for the Stormhawk interceptor. This is what would go under the Stormhawk and have like the las talon and things on there. I built up the mount initially as a way of thinking, could I fit an autocannon in there? I thought it looked absolutely brilliant, stuck underneath the vents as you see there. Glued that on and thought, the autocannons are not going to go on, so let's put it on and work out what we're going to put in there later. At this stage of the kit bash, I wasn't 100% sure what this was actually going to end up being, other than some sort of imperial floating kind of vehicle. Wasn't quite sure it was going to end up being an armiger, that it does end up, but it works out quite happily. Now, taking the engine exhaust vents here, now these are meant to be stuck at what is now the bottom of this kit bash. They're now at the top of this kit bash, you can see here, taking the locating pins off and just gluing them into a place that looked quite sensible over the top of the hull there. Now, see on the desk there, I have built up the autocannons with the arm mounts as they come in that kit. The filming on that kind of went all real blur and you couldn't see anything, so I've kind of got rid of that one. And also lost the filming for where you see the weapon mount stuck onto the base there. So essentially I've taken what would go onto the shoulders of the armiger, built it up kind of exactly as it's supposed to be, and attached it to the base of this floating armiger, but kind of cut down a little bit, so it'll make kind of some sort of sense. Now here's just going to be a minute or two of footage just showing you how, when you're experimenting with the kit bash, you don't necessarily get it right every time. So I wanted to cover up, you see the two little holes in there, which is where those exhaust vents are meant to be glued when the model's the other way around like it would be in the armiger kit. So I took this kind of, what is the plasma kind of, or melter pods that go on the melter gun that you fit to this model as like the melter fuel, and thought, great, I'll use that and I'll just stick it straight in there. And as you can see, it didn't fit, it kept dropping off, couldn't make it work. So I decided to try and slice the circles off the back of the power plant, try and glue that in place, and no, that wouldn't work either. And just to show you that when you take an idea, it won't necessarily go right the first time. Keep playing with it, keep messing about, really, until you've slathered it in glue and stuck it on the model, you can mess as much as you like. So after a bit of playing, decided that, you know what, one of these tanks would be absolutely perfect. So I then sliced off the additional tank, again, cleaned it up again, and then stuck it down at a totally different angle under there to again cover up those kind of two holes where the engine vents would go, or the exhaust pipes rather. So play and experiment when you're doing a kit bash. You know, there is no right or wrong way to kit bash. Try and make it in your head, think, what is it there for, what's it doing? And obviously I use these melter things because by this point I've decided I was going to put a melter gun into that weapon mount I'd put underneath the hull. So it kind of fits in, so maybe that's where the melter's powered from, and there's cables internally underneath. So it's now time to cut the melter gun down. This was a fairly easy one. The melter gun that comes on the armiger sprue, chopped it in half, wouldn't quite fit into the mounting that goes on the Stormhawk. So again, bit of trimming down, bit of cutting around the corners, and got it to fit in quite nicely into the front of there. And again, just put it together with that bit of poly cement. This whole kit bash, by the way, has just literally been done with plastic parts at this moment, just putting it together, poly cement, pair of clippers and a knife, and just a bit of experimentation. And like I said before, I set off with the idea of doing a more imperial looking hover kind of vehicle, like skimmer. And I was at one point going to turn this into Nurgle, which if you watch the channel a lot, you know is my biggest force. So we got to this stage, we've got the guns on, it's kind of looking armiger looking, it's sort of looking fairly sensible. But there's some blank areas you can see there, big hole in the back where obviously that's meant to be where the torso kind of mounts to the original build. Obviously we're not going to do that, so I need to fill that in. The sprue that I just saw there was a Necromunda sprue for the Underhive market, and that's a Necromunda kind of power plant that I'm going to stick into that gap. Now it was finding something to go on the top of the torso. And this really shows you my kind of experimental stage and why you should never throw bits away from kits. This is my Knights bits box, so when I've done my Chaos Knight army or my Imperial Knights, I save all the sprues, save all the pieces, and I was just playing and looking for something semi-cylindrical to go into that space on this model that obviously would ordinarily be filled by a genuine kind of part. I played through the whole of the bits box. You can see they even sliced off some larger pieces, started experimenting. None of them really worked, I wasn't really happy with them, and in the end I came up with this piece, and if I'm honest, I don't know what this piece actually is off a Knight sprue. I think it's like a piston part that goes into the leg or to the weapon. Not 100% sure though, because again it was just on a sprue and there wasn't much of it left. So cut the end off, trimmed it right down. Then I thought, oh, actually this model is missing where there's kind of the mounting frame, I suppose, off the original model. So I got that, and then dug around to think out what I'm going to fill in the hole at the front of the model with. No idea what the part, and again, I think it's some sort of hunter-killer mounting from, again, some sort of Knight kit, not entirely sure. Cut off a little piece that just looked kind of cool, kind of mechanical, kind of maybe made sense as a sensor that was sticking out the front. So you can see my kitbash method, sometimes I've got an idea of what I want to get going for, but not really how I'm going to get there. And there is nothing wrong with that when you're experimenting. Now it's making it actually hover, because obviously at the moment it would just be stuck on a base. This is just a 4mm piece of aluminium rod. If you've watched my Titan building videos, this is what I use to pin together Titan legs. Cut about a 3-4 inch piece off that, using just a drill here, just drill a bit of a hole into the base of the armiger and then glue that metal rod in. I did drill a hole through the base of the normal armiger base it's going on, and put a bit of green stuff around there to secure it. And this was something I shared then on Instagram, here is the kitbash kind of in its basically finished form. So what we've got here is an armiger torso, parts from an armiger, then a lot of parts from the Stormhawk interceptor, being the engines and kind of the weapon mount on the front with the melter gun in, parts from a Necromunda Underhive kit with that power pod coming out the back, very much inspired by the recent Fallout series where, you know, power armor has this kind of pack that you can pull out the back of. So not an overly complicated kind of set of parts, only from really a couple of kits, and all left over from kits I've done before. Obviously I did go away and buy a Stormhawk interceptor to get the engine parts, but you know, then I'll have a cool Stormhawk, it's a Storm Talon gunship I'll have for my Marines. And that's about getting the model built and painted. Not going to go into too many details about that, but just getting it based. Milliput spread across the base, and I'm going to make this match my Space Marine army, if you've seen that. So a bit of an interesting Space Marine army that I do with kind of a slight jungle theme. And what I'm doing here is just using a small piece of slate from the garden to push in some detail into the milliput, as you can see there, to make this look a bit more like real rock. Basing, fairly simple, again matching my Marines, bit of PVA glue, some little bits of slate just onto there, and then the rest of it's kind of just sanded up, and then I'll take it and paint it up into the same as my Marine force. So not really going to go into huge amounts of details of the paint scheme here, because this is more about the kind of idea and concept behind a kit bash. And I suppose when I'm looking at the finished result on this one, I think it works out really well. At the end you'll see obviously the finished model when we get to the paint scheme in a second. But I had a concept and an idea, and thankfully it worked out quite well. I think there are a couple of faults on it when you're looking at starting the paint job here, in terms of, well, we've now got the kind of air vents or the exhaust escape vents right in front of where the enemy would shoot, but I figure this is protected by some sort of force field, or it could be a radiator vent. It's the 41st millennium. Not everything has to make a great deal of sense. The engines are possibly slightly too large for the model. I think if this was going to be official kit, they'd probably make it slightly smaller. But I do think how the auto cannon mounts have gone on. You can see the nice shot here down the side. You know, these are the actual mounts that are supposed to hold these auto cannons on. I've just cut and trimmed them down so it fits underneath the armiger a bit differently. I think that works really well. I think the melter gun mounting looks particularly cool, and the engines work. So overall, I'm really happy with it. If I could, you know, wave a magic wand or 3D print things instead of using spare parts, I'd probably make the engines that little bit smaller. Other than that, I think, you know, we're pretty much where I would have it. So you can see here, doing my normal kind of painting scheme as I do, started off working on the brass and things after that undercoat. Undercoated the model with lead belcher spray. Starting off with metallic spray is just such an easy way of doing kitbash as a model that is, with a lot of metal showing. And then laid all the base layers down, as you saw. Nice dirty ink wash, that's very much my style of painting, sort of slightly grim dark and whatever. And then after the ink wash has dried, going over the top layers again, just to bring out some shades and highlights. Now, an interesting one on this one, when I was doing it, the red looked a little bit too pinky for me. So after the actual red was sort of finished, I went back over with a contrast paint, and it's something I'm experimenting with a little bit lately, is actually using the contrast paints almost as like a top layer kind of wash. Now the model is done, it's just finishing touches. You'll see I've done some sort of burn effects onto the vents and the melter gun. I do varnish the model first, and it gives a real different kind of effect onto the armour. And then after that, I've done a resin pour into the river base, which again, I've got a video on my Space Marine playlist of how I do that. So I'm really happy with how those models turned out. I actually think it looks like something that does really fit into that kind of Adeptus Mechanicus or Space Marine army, a little bit grimdark, a little bit weird. And again, yeah, really happy with what I've done on the kitbash. So if you like this kind of video, drop a like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of YouTube jazz down below. And hopefully I'll see you again. Cheers, everyone.